Welcome back to another episode of Insider Talks. Today we have a special guest. We have Dr. Ravi Chamria. He is the co-founder and CEO of Zeeve, and I wanted to welcome you to the show. How you doing, Ravi?
Yeah, doing great. Thanks, Travis, for welcoming me, and very excited to be on this show.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that we're working together on a couple things. We're going to get into talking Appchains, Rollups, a lot of exciting things. And I know I've read some of your content pieces just about how fast really your thesis is with Rollups and Appchains and how they're leading the way into redefining this kind of like the next era of Web3, right? Because it's all really about adoption and scale. And Appchains and Rollups have a lot to do with that. And one of the things, of course, you're doing, and we've been working together lately, is you're very active in putting on IRL events, and you've been doing this all over the globe. And you have one coming up for Rollup and Appchain. So I'll just I wanted to plant that seed here before we kind of get into the content. So coming up at ETH Denver, we'll have the Appchain Rollup Day that's coming on the 28th. That's on the Friday at ETH Denver. So we'll chat more about that at the end. But I just wanted to kind of bring that up. I guess before we go into kind of more about your thesis and all these things happening, maybe tell me a little bit about how Zeeve came about, how you got into doing this, and we'll take it from there.
Yep. So I've been into IT consulting or IT space as an entrepreneur for almost 25 years. Started my journey with the .com during the internet era of 98. And then, before getting into blockchain, I was in fintech space for 7-8 years. Got into blockchain in 17 with the intent of solving some problems in the enterprise space. And while working with enterprises, we saw a challenge of, setting up enterprise-grade blockchain networks. And that's where we got the motivation to start Zeev, to build a no-code automation platform, make it super, super easy to automatically deploy blockchain networks and manage it, bring in security and compliances and all third-party integrations, etc. So that's how Zeev was started about 4 years back. And we started with enterprise segment and then, moved on to public protocol space. And it has been a very, very exciting journey so far.
I got my start back in the .com area too, so I'm sure we could share some stories about how this really took effect and how it shaped a lot of how we're both working in this field. I think that was a really interesting time, and I think we see some parallels to the crypto blockchain world, and I think that keeps us from getting in trouble from you see other things and you kind of see the signs of maybe some people are doing some things wrong that we may have seen back in our day from the .com era.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the role of rollups and Appchains for layer ones and layer twos. A lot of people look at them and they're positioned as complementary to L1 and L2s. How do you see their adoption enhancing or competing with existing blockchain systems? I know that's a big area of debate, and I'm curious what gaps you think they fill as well.
Yep. So I think, so there are 3 areas that we have seen. And as you know, we started with enterprises. There are permission protocols that most of the enterprises have been using, like, Hyperledger, Fabric, Besu, etc. Now, the challenges with permission protocols were like, they were too private, too permissioned in nature. And, and that's why, very few consortiums have been using it. And there is no larger decentralization narrative that powers them. So that was a challenge with permission protocols. But they did offer security, compliances, other benefits that enterprises were looking at. On the other side, if you see dApps, which are deploying directly on public chains, like Ethereum or Polygon POS or Binance, now they get, a ready-made hosting platform where they can put on their dApps. They don't need to worry about the underlying infra, but they land up into scalability challenges. There's a congestion. They are fighting for the shared block space. So that's where scalability challenges started coming in. So they are getting the benefits of security and decentralization, but the scalability becomes a challenge. And then, of course, if they want to have data privacy, their use case demands some kind of compliances. It becomes very, very difficult for them to realize that or build that while working on a public chain. And the third scenario is you launch your own custom chain, which was very common 4-5 years back. We, in fact, built quite a few L1 chains for a lot of customers. It was a long-drawn exercise, building a chain, then bringing a lot of validators to decentralize it, build a community around it. So it was a long-drawn exercise. Especially validator onboarding was very, very tough. And that is very much required to have sufficient decentralization. So there you had your own choices. You could have configurations, you can have your compliances. But at the same time, it was very difficult to onboard so many validators to have sufficient decentralization. So if you see all these three segments, they had their own set of challenges. And that is where I believe, Rollups and Appchains, they came in to solve all these three together. With Rollups today, you have both the flavors. You have Rollup, you have Validium. So that means you have control over the data, how you manage the data, so you have compliances. Second, you do not need to worry about creating your own validator set because your security and decentralization is coming directly from Ethereum in the case of Rollups. And there's a concept of AVS, like Eigen AVS. And then similarly, Cosmos has come up with ICS, and similar initiatives have come in, like, Babylon, bringing Bitcoin security to the EVM ecosystem. So security and decentralization is taken care of. The compliances are taken care of. And on the scalability side, since it's your chain, every rollup or app chain is your own chain. So you can have your own configs. You can have some customizations, whatever you want, depending on your use case. You can have gasless transactions if you want. So using account abstraction, like enterprises, they typically want that, okay, I don't want the use of token. My use case, I don't want to expose gas transactions or token transactions to the end users. So they can do that using gasless transactions. And then at the same time, you get massive scalability. So like, if you use optimistic rollups, you can easily get 3,000 to 4,000 transactions per second. And then, ZK rollups are today, are sitting at lower TPS right now. But as they are going to mature in 2025, we are going to see much, much higher TPS. If you see some of the stacks like Avalanche L1, already you can do 10,000 TPS. Cosmos SDK, again, Barachain is one derivative of Cosmos SDK, 10,000 TPS. So you are taking care of scalability, you are taking care of compliances, you have a lot of flexibility in terms of configurations and customizations for your use case. At the same time, you are getting the maximum benefit of security and decentralization coming out of Bitcoin and Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, is a very, very strong narrative and solving a lot of problems as what the other blockchain systems, could not provide.
Totally agree. That really well said. And I think you touched on a lot of this, and I think that one thing that just comes to my mind, you think about this, it's almost like when people were building their own L1, they're building like their own Apple App Store. Instead of building an app on the Apple App Store, they were having to go through all the effort of building an entire app store themselves. And like you said, in general, purpose built specific to their application and what they're looking to do is really what most enterprises are looking to accomplish. They're not looking to be the technology provider. They're looking to be, solve a specific problem, solve a certain, they have a certain use case that they want to, why they need to scale. And also, as you noted, they can adopt all of the benefits of the L1 without all of this extra cost and parameters, but also like they can customize it to their needs. Like you said, if they want to shield gas costs, or eliminate gas costs, all those kind of things are benefits for that. And also scalability, like you mentioned, aside from security. So you touched on this a little bit from like enterprises, looking to do this. But I guess what are some example companies that you used a couple like with Avalanche and stuff, but just in specific use cases, like enterprises are looking to do this that are using Appchains and rollups currently, and how you see that use case working.
Yeah, so there are quite a few use cases. I think enterprises are still warming up to the idea. But, we have few cases like, if I talk about some of our own existing customers, like, we have Siemens Energy, which is using Avalanche L1, powering, a carbon credit use case. Then, we have Deutsche Bank, which is part of the Project Guardian through Memento blockchain using ZK Rollup, using ZK Sync, ZK Chain. Then, we have Remedy, which is a healthcare player, have got a massive healthcare institutions using their platform, using Avalanche L1, including all HIPAA compliances, data compliances in place. They are based out of US.
Wow.
And Sony, I think these are some of the customers, but then, some of the external, Sony recently launched with OP Stack. And then we have a Deloitte case study, which did using Avalanche, and JP Morgan built a use case with Avalanche and XLR coming into picture. So I think a lot of enterprises are now, looking at rollups. And there are quite a few others, which I cannot name right now, but there are a lot of enterprises, banks, and government institutions who are working with us, who are using Rollups and Appchain stacks to build some use case or the other. There are a plethora of use cases. In the financial services, they are into supply chain, digital record management, tokenization. Real world asset tokenization is very compelling. We have one customer called Savala. They are into commodity tokenization. It's already a live platform, and now they are onboarding a lot of enterprise players, including banks, as secondary market players. So, and then in the government, there are again their own set of public use cases. So, quite a few players, I would say.
Yeah, I guess I could probably guess the answer to this, but I'm curious for the next one. When the types of institutions that are coming to you right now, you just named several, so I know there's a lot, but I would guess that one of the biggest factors they talk about first is compliance, right? Like compliance and security, just given the current nature of where we're at in blockchain and adoption, and particularly like you mentioned, a lot of the use cases you mentioned are dealing with financial services or financial applications, where they probably are concerned about that. But I'm curious, like, because obviously there's governance, there's tokenomics. You brought up some of this. Clearly, there's an interoperability and scalability questions. But what are some of the leading things? Is it compliance? Is that one of the biggest things that they're concerned about right off the bat?
Yeah, so compliance definitely is which is so all the regulatory requirements or compliance requirements which conforms to their internal policies or security policies. That is definitely a must. But rollup stacks, there's a Validium option where you have data control. And in fact, there's another interesting concept called volition by Zeev, which where you can have part of the data, public, and part of the data which is got private. So you can have different flavor. And then like you have data availability committee option, DAC, with Polygon CDK, where you can have a consortium, a private consortium, which is taking care of the data. So different options based on your use case, based on your compliance requirement. And then, at the protocol level, you can have implementation of identity. So decentralized identity. We recently partnered with Privedo, which was earlier Polygon decentralized identity. And then apart from that, you can have KYC AML checks enabled at the protocol layer. So a lot of options are there because at the end of the day, it's your chain, your code. You can configure it in whichever way. And it also allows, some kind of customization required. So I think compliance definitely is super, super important. That goes without saying. Apart from that, I think from a use case perspective, we have seen in the enterprise space, a lot of industry consortium failed because they could not gain traction. There were a lot of agency problems, who is driving the consortium, competitors in an industry coming together. So governance, I think, becomes very important. So having a decentralized governance, again, having a public favor rather than, highly private nature of blockchain makes it very, very easy so that people can trust, especially minority partners in a consortium. They can feel more secure and can trust the consortium. So I believe and governance from operational activities and taking tactical decisions on the chain also becomes very, very important. Apart from that, rest of the pieces are how to extend over a period of time. Token economics may or may not be important. In some cases, yes, where depending again on the use case, if token it's an asset-backed token or it's a utility token, depending on what the token type is. And in some cases, as I mentioned, it may be completely gasless, so that you give a superior Web 2 kind of user experience to the users so that they don't even realize. And then we are seeing, there are few use cases which have been implemented in India where people even don't know that blockchain is being used as the backend infrastructure. Right. So that is, I think, is going to be the new era of use cases where end users will never realize that they are using something which has got a blockchain backend.
Hiding the wires is definitely the goal, and that from the .com thing where everything was about the .com and nothing was about the business that was actually happening.
Right.
And I think we've seen some of that in blockchain where everything's about the blockchain, but it's not about the business. And I like how you're explaining. It's like, you're hiding the blockchain. Like, the users don't necessarily need to know that. And I think that dovetails into some of the key points of why, like security is a selling point. I'm curious if you could explain a little bit about that. How does inherent security from like Ethereum, other L1s like Avalanche, your Rollups address these enterprise grade requirements, particularly for like the regulated industries like we've been talking about, like for healthcare, finance, you already have clients in these areas, so I know this is very clear for you.
Yeah, so security of course, security and decentralization is a bit complex when it comes to navigating the enterprise space. So now some enterprises, like as I took the case of Deutsche Bank as part of Project Guardian, they are using ZK Sync, ZK Rollup. So ZK Rollup, they are using Ethereum security, right? So in some cases, they can use Ethereum security. We know that Ethereum is the most vibrant ecosystem, at the same time a network, which is and millions of nodes are running now. It is highly secure. Rollups are using all the proofs are being submitted, like in the case of ZK Rollup, the ZK proofs are being submitted and verified on Ethereum. So that way, all the transactions that you are doing, the proofs are residing on Ethereum, which is very, very secure. So one way is that. The second is, let's say you are setting up an Avalanche L1 chain, then you can have your own validator set. And then within that, you can have your consortium. So let's say you are a banking consortium and you are running some use cases, let's say a trade finance use case, and you want to have your importers, importing banks, exporting banks, and some of the other intermediaries to run the validators, then you can create a consortium of all these and they can be running the validators, right? So that way you can take care of the security, because it's not as secure as a public network like Ethereum, but still that all the major players in the consortium are well covered because they themselves are running the validator nodes. So depending on the use case, you can choose the stack, and then accordingly you can see what kind of security and decentralization can be achieved.
Perfect. And I guess this goes parallel right into like from a scaling question. Like you touched on this earlier, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about just how rollups and app chains, address more of the scaling problem, and of course, like cost structure as well. Like how does that benefit the end user to look at a rollup or an app chain versus a full application, like a full L1 type of thing.
Yep. So like, if you see an L1, like, L1 has got all the layers together built in. So there's a consensus layer, there's an execution layer, which are all combined together. In the rollup, essentially what we are doing is we are moving the execution layer outside the Ethereum network. So the security and decentralization is still being covered by Ethereum, but the execution of transactions is happening on the rollup chain. So now you have a rollup chain, which is a blockchain in itself. You're doing all the transactions there. You can define the gas. You can have your native gas token. You can define the gas, how the gas will be charged. So it can be as minimum as possible. It can be zero if you want, or it can be completely gasless. And you will have higher throughput. So scalability is completely solved. And then, so from an Ethereum standpoint, actually all the transactions are happening off chain on your rollup chain.
Right.
And then, the proofs of these transactions are submitted on Ethereum. So that way, scalability is not a challenge. Now you have more control over the cost. You control the gas cost, and you control whether the gas has to be there or not from a user standpoint. So you can configure accordingly.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, and I'm asking some of these more simple questions because I know, like, for some of the projects that listen to this, they're thinking about, what decisions to make, like technical stack, how to, set up their application, whether it's, like you said, whether it's an institution or enterprise that's, 100 years old, or it's a startup that's, 100 days old. They're all looking for specific solutions, and many are finding that the app chain and roll up solutions are much more fitting to their use cases, right? Are you seeing that to be more from your inbound, when people are connecting with you at these events, as well as like your inbound discussions? Is that seeming to be like a higher escalation of requests these days because of that?
Yeah, no, 100%. So from a use case perspective, we see that, all use cases fit very nicely, very well to the rollups and app chain stacks. It's only that, if you are starting and you expect very few transactions initially, then setting up your own rollup or app chain is a bit expensive proposition, right? Because end of the day, you're creating a blockchain of yourself, right? So it's going to be more expensive than running your application or dApp on a public chain, where you are actually sharing, or it's like a shared hosting versus your dedicated machines,
Right.
right? So that difference will still be there. So if you're like in the traditional hosting environment, you buy a dedicated machine, even if you're not using it, you are consuming only 10% of the capacity. Still, you're paying for the whole of it, right? So that same thing happens in the case of when you set up a rollup and app chain. So when your transactions are less, then of course it becomes expensive proposition. But as your transactions scale, then it becomes very, very economical. At the same time, the user experience, you have massive user experience. And then players like us, we have made it so easy. We have one-click deployments. Then we have brought in 60 integration partners we have across all categories. So if you want to have, let's say, decentralized Oracle or interoperability or storage or account abstraction, so we can bring in all these partners, plug and play, and integrate with your chain. Then we work directly with the product teams of these rollup stacks. So we ensure that you get all the updates, upgrades. We provide 24/7 monitoring. So the point is that, we abstract the entire infrastructure for these startups. So they don't need to worry or hire or train their internal resources to build and launch and manage their chains. That is something that, we handle completely for them. They
Yeah.
still need to focus purely on their dApp development, on building their business, building their community, and their GTM and so on and so forth. So, but still, I would say that yes, you do require a certain number of transactions or a certain amount of traction before it makes a viable or commercial viability or sense.
100%. Yeah, and you kind of telegraphed the next question for me because Zeev has some of the most, if not the most, partnerships from the L1s and from the integrations. So I know you've mentioned a couple so far in this conversations, but I'd love for you to maybe just spend a moment kind of explaining some of your L1 partnerships, some of your providers, your integrators, because like you mentioned, you are abstracting all this, you are providing this kind of like done for you, roll up app chain type of layer. And I'd love for you to kind of share some of the additional companies that you're working with, because it is a way for people to get access to the Polkadot, the Cosmos ecosystem, the Avalanche ecosystem, the Ethereum ecosystem. So I'll let you kind of explain more. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so on the optimistic rollup stacks, we work with Optimism, OP Stack, and Arbitrum Orbit Stack. On ZK rollup side, we work with Polygon CDK and ZK Sync, ZK Chains. Then, on the app chain stack, we work with Avalanche L1, Cosmos SDK, and Substrate. So these are primarily, 7 stack that we work with. And then,
Mhm.
there are a few other partnerships that are right now work in progress. And we are seeing, how they are maturing and the ecosystem is evolving. So we will probably forge a couple more partnerships this year. But right now, the focus is on some of these stacks. And then, so these are the stacks. Then, there are other integration partners, like on the rollups. On the data availability side, we work with all the major providers, Celestia, Avail, Eigen, as well as Near. And then we work with provers like Sindri or Gavelet. And then, we work with account abstraction, Byconomy and Pimlico, Zero Dev. And similarly, on the interoperability side, we work with Hyperlane, Axelar, Router Protocol. And then, so accordingly, on the developer tools, we work very closely with Third Web. And so across all categories, wallet infrastructure, we work with Den, Safe, payment infrastructure. So across all categories. And we continue to add more and more partners as wherever demands come from. And then we have our own products. So we have one product on the Explorer side. So we have our own block explorer called Traceoff. And then another product for data indexing called TraceEye, which again is very integral for all custom app chains and rollups. We already have, more than 100 installations for these. So this is largely our partner ecosystem, and we try to build more and more native integrations and create a win-win situation with our partners.
It's very obvious, yeah, and I know obviously from knowing your team and seeing how you operate, it's very clear. And like you mentioned, the type of partnerships you have and the tech stack that you're able to offer your clients is amazing. I mean, as we're kind of winding down, but I do want to kind of talk about, because I think there's always that question, as we've been talking about so far, is okay, we heard about all the benefits. We heard about who your partners are, what the tech stacks look like. So what does a framework decision making look like for your clients, like with options that you all just that you described? Again, I know each one is. I know a lot of this becomes very bespoke, but what should products or projects or protocols consider when they're selecting this framework? Based on a lot of the things that you've talked about, going through the app chain route, which ecosystems, going the roll up route, etc. And I know this can be a very long answer, but I'm kind of this is kind of more generalized, of course. But I'm just curious in general, like when someone's just from step one, like someone listening to this, it's kind of looking at this. Of course, that's what this conversations are about, is kind of helping to kind of get people interested in this concept of maybe this is for them as an enterprise, as a startup, etc. So I'll let you kind of share maybe a little bit
Right.
of that.
Yeah. So yeah. So of course, this is a very complex piece, but I'll lay down, some of the criteria or parameters that becomes important. So one is ecosystem itself, like which stack has got what kind of ecosystem. And, quite a few startups, they align with a certain ecosystem. So like, for example, somebody is already part of Polygon. They are running on Polygon POS. So their natural inclination would be to jump onto Polygon CDK and build a ZK rollup using that. Somebody is already building on Optimism or Base. They would like to go for OP stack, So one is either they are already aligned with that ecosystem or they would like to align with that ecosystem. So ecosystem becomes very important. And then, every ecosystem offers their own benefits. They may have some incentives, grants, or community or investors. So what the ecosystem, how the ecosystem is helping a startup, they take a decision based on that. Then, there's a maturity of stack. So like ZK rollup stacks are right now in the stage of maturation. So it depends on your use case. Some use cases do require that they want to have ZK as part of their strategy. So they would like to have ZK as to start with. Some believe that they want to have a mature stack today because they are running a DeFi use case and they already have users and transactions. So they would probably prefer optimistic rollup or Avalanche L1, which is massively mature, right? Maturity becomes another consideration. And then based on maturity, then comes into picture your TPS and performance. So there are then, minor nuances that comes into picture. Some may require, depending on their use case, very low latency, a very high throughput. Then, they may choose one stack or the other based on what the throughput situation is, a block time or and so on. So, and then, cost again sometimes become a factor because each stack has a different requirements to set up and run it. So cost again may become a factor. But we see that, cost as comparison from stack to stack is normally not a very big factor. But yeah, comparison from whether to run a dApp on a public chain vis-a-vis launching your own rollup and app chain, cost definitely is a big factor. But
Yeah.
while comparing between these stacks or among these stacks, it's not a major factor, but still it's a factor. So yeah, so these are some of the criteria I would say, high level, which plays a role based on our experience.
Amazing answer. Yeah, I love that. And I think that lastly, I'll wrap up with this, and this ties into what you were just saying, but how much of a factor or strategic asset is the interoperability aspect? Like I guess that becomes, because you just explained, okay, they're going to pick this technical stack and setup, but as we know, a lot of these things become interoperable. There's a lot of interoperability opportunities now. Um, you know, should projects plan for that? Are you seeing them plan for that? Does that even seem like are they just more looking to solve, the problem, do what they need to do first based on their first app chain rollup?
I would say both. We have seen quite a few startups focus on interoperability. Again, depending on use cases, like they are operating in DeFi payments, interop becomes very, very important, especially cross-chain liquidity. And I think what we have seen is, with these different rollup stacks come into picture and building an ecosystem around them, rollups have ended up segmenting the Ethereum ecosystem. So interoperability, the whole chain abstraction narrative or the interoperability is actually defragmenting the ecosystem and bringing them together into Ethereum. So I think interoperability is very, very important. So if you see the Superchain initiative by OPStack, so the whole idea is that how to bring in all the OPStack chains together. If you see the Ag Layer initiative by Polygon, the idea is that not just CDK chains, but other chains can also collaborate together. So that's again an interoperability initiative. And then there are a lot of chain abstraction initiatives today, allowing, like much better alternative to traditional bridges and so on and so forth, so that better interoperability can be there. So I think interoperability is a very strong narrative, very, very important. Some startups do not consider that to be important initially because their use cases may not require it, or they may not require from a business perspective. Their priorities are a bit different at the starting point, but eventually, yes, interoperability becomes very, very important. And I think each of these rollup stacks have worked massively in this space. A lot of external other startups as well as the protocol themselves, they have been very, very, I would say, active in achieving interoperability or adopting or integrating one way or the other.
Yeah, that's excellent. And like you mentioned, this is all kind of has the same common denominator of abstraction, hiding the blockchain, as much as possible in the future. As depending on your use case, of course. I mean, if you have all technical users, that's a different story. But most of these applications are have end users that are not even necessarily always blockchain native. So you're right. It's really interesting to see how this is evolving and how and I guess the trends seem to be continuing to move not just the interoperable side, but to, as you've mentioned with your thesis and as Zeev has been proving out, is the app chain and rollup side is seems to be the next evolution. There's probably not going to be as many mega L1s, that are out there now. It's like a lot of the next evolution seems to be, if you're building or if you're a big enterprise, even the L1, chain as a service, rollup as a service is really the way to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we are already seeing the trend, it has been a massive trend in 24 and we are seeing the early trends in 25 as well.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, this has been an outstanding conversation. Again, Dr. Ravi, pleasure for you joining me and kind of sharing all of the great insights about Zeev and what's happening, the trends in the space. Again, anybody who's listening, if you're listening before February 28th, at Ethereum Denver, the biggest blockchain conference in the United States, going to have 2025 shaping up to be a really great year. The Rollup Day, Appchain Day is going to be happening from 11 to 3:30 on the 28th. So please check out our website to see that. It's the rollupday.com is the event site. And you'll be able to check that out and get more information about Zeev as well. But as we're parting, Ravi, let us know where everybody can find you, get in contact with Zeev, and we'll close it out.
Absolutely. I think thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. And thanks, Travis, for this opportunity. It was great talking to you. And I think I'm available on LinkedIn as well as Twitter. So connect with me if you have any questions. You can always book a consulting session with me. And I would love to, if you have any questions, if you're starting up, building up, have any questions regarding Rollup, Appchain, I would love to, help you out in any ways. And I would say keep building, keep smiling.
Absolutely. Great parting words. Thank you for your time today. We'll talk soon. I look forward to seeing you in Denver.